Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you guys are doing good so far, having a good beginning to the week. And it's Monday, February 22nd. About 5 minutes, we will get things underway. Morning, Connor. Hi, Elif. Good to see you guys. Eddie, my cat, is crying over there. That's funny. But I just fed him, so he just wants to play. 1 second, I'm just going to grab a little soft drink. Hi, Grant. How's it going? Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Peach. Good morning, Ryan. And hi, Dimitri. Good morning. Hey, Peachy. Hi, Julia. Hey there, Kylie. Good girl. She's really happy this morning. Hi, Jianyan. Hi, Alex. Good morning. Hey there, Ellie. Hi, Brian. Just giving Peachy a little attention before the lecture starts. But in a way, she can never get enough. Hi, Brian. Falling asleep already? Hi, Eloise. Morning there. Good morning, everybody. Peachy's still sleeping in a little bit. Hey, Ryan. Hi, Nina. Good to see everybody. Yeah, she's just so happy. Hey, little girl. She's very pampered, but she's not high maintenance. So she's just a great cat, just like her brother. Okay, just another minute or so. Okay. Well, I hope you guys had a good weekend. Hey, Steven, good to see you there. I just kind of laid low and took it easy this weekend for the most part. Hi, Chase. Hi, Nicole. Hey, Abby and Noah. I got a new cell phone, so like, just in case, I mean, I doubt this will happen again, but if there were another outage or whatever, and I had to switch to a hotspot, this is a big upgrade because this is now like a 5G phone, so I'm thinking that the data speeds and the bandwidth will be a little bit better in case I ever do that again, and therefore, if it ever switches to hotspot, maybe the clarity of the video and audio would be a little bit sharper, but anyway, doing what I can. And welcome back. So it's now 9 a.m. Thanks again, guys, for being here. I'm just going to get us into our next topic. So today is a key meeting because we are actually moving on to another topic in the semester. We've spent the first 4 weeks or whatever talking about philosophy of religion. And now we're going to try and start dealing with another major topic in philosophy. So philosophy, like some other academic subjects that you guys know, sometimes has a breakdown of specializations. Like people can have a more focused area of research within philosophy. So if you studied science, you would normally say, no, I'm focused on biology or chemistry or physics, right? There are branches of science. Same with philosophy. So we've already taken a strong look at one of the big branches, which is philosophy of religion and all that material. Not to worry, Patrick, that's cool. I mean, I'll take the compliments at any time. But yeah, philosophy of religion, the first topic. Now, after that, we're going to move on to the second major unit of philosophy study for us, and that's ethics. So ethics is going to be our topic for at least a couple of weeks. Okay, and I might have made a passing reference to the term of ethics, but I think it is also something that maybe some of you guys have a little bit of general background knowledge on. So who, if anybody, can tell me what they think this word ethics has to do with? Like, what is ethics all about? What is the subject matter and information that people deal with when they discuss the topic of ethics? Buzzwords come to mind? Anything? Let me know in the chat. And let's just see where your head is at and what you already know a little bit about on this topic of ethics. Moral, okay, good kitty. You set you down, Peach. Yeah, what's right and wrong? What's morally right and wrong? And that's true. So ethics is basically the study of morality and moral concepts. Okay, so that is ethics. It's the study of morality and moral concepts. And as you guys are correctly noting, it does have to do with terms and ideas like what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, what's moral versus immoral. So let me put on the board a little divider, and we're going to just try and think of some basic moral terms. And I see some of them that are already popping up here in the chat. So I'm just going to list for us some moral concepts. And I think one easy and I think helpful way to break down this concept is to sort of list these polarized opposites in the realm of morality, like what you guys are putting in the chat. So let me just add some of them that are already there. For example, what's wrong and what's right in a moral sense. So right versus wrong. I also see there, Noah, you wrote morally right or wrong. Okay, can anybody give me any like synonyms that sound like a similar division into right and wrong, except we're talking about a different pair of terms? So there's right versus wrong. Also, people use what other words? Just let's add to this list. You kind of get the genre. It's going to be like the positive valence and the negative valence on the moral scale. So we have right and wrong morally. Sometimes people say you did a right action, you did the right thing, or shame on you, you did something wrong, that was morally wrong. There's also good and evil, okay, good and bad. We could have gone with the stronger term of evil, that's fine, but I guess in everyday conversation, we sometimes say that was bad. Evil is on a higher level even, but that's definitely one of the terms in the mix. Good versus bad, ethical versus unethical, that's a good one too, Claire. Sometimes an action or a practice or an institution can be labeled in either of these ways. the person's behavior and conduct was ethical, it was highly ethical, or it was unethical, or this business practice is unethical, or this particular form of government or something in a given case could be claimed as either ethical or unethical. Ryan, you mentioned integrity. Yes, integrity, I think, has to do with saying what you really believe and acting on it, and not being deceptive or dissembling or whatever. But I guess as we're focused on just this like kind of polarized pairing of terms, maybe there's another option we can add to the list. Right, wrong, good, bad, ethical, unethical. How about moral versus the contrary of moral, immoral? Let's see. And if you have more thoughts, you can always put those in the chat at any time. Right, wrong, good, bad, ethical, unethical, moral, immoral. And ethics has a lot to do with how people behave and how they choose to act. So sometimes we just think of it in terms of action, like what you ought to do versus what you shouldn't do. So what one ought versus ought not do. Okay, anything else in the mix? Good, I'm just trying to rack my own brain a little bit too. Good and bad, moral and immoral. Sometimes you've heard just versus unjust. That's another kind of moral pair of terms. Okay, so whenever we evaluate a person's action or our own behavior is evaluated in either of these ways, we're thinking in terms of ethics. So like sometimes things happen in the world and they make us morally upset. You know, you can see perhaps an injustice committed against somebody. Maybe they were harmed, assaulted, abused, the victim of some form of personal violence, police misconduct, government misconduct, whatever the case could be, wartime. Sometimes people may argue for the unjustifiability of particular actions taken in political statecraft. So it could happen on an individual level, a social level, or anything in between. But we are sometimes subject to moral judgment of others. Sometimes you do things and you're held accountable by members of the moral community saying to you, that was wrong. Or in other cases, praising you and commending you for doing something that was righteous and just. So we're all subject to moral criticism and moral judgment. Sometimes you're the moral judge of others' conduct or your own. And sometimes you're the subject of the moral judgment of other people or even society at large. I guess you could say that a legal proceeding where a person is prosecuted for a crime is one way of our shared moral sensibilities playing out in the social realm. So what philosophers throughout the generations have been interested in on ethics is analyzing these concepts. What is the ground or the foundation of saying that something is right or wrong? You might think, probably some of you do think, that there's nothing objective to say about this. Right and wrong are just subjective to the individual or to their personal sense of their moral code. But you might be surprised to know that there have been some very intelligent and powerful philosophers over the generations and through the centuries that have argued that there is some kind of objective basis to morality. And that means that we're going to try and learn about these theories of morality that have come down from the past. So there's two major big ethical systems in the West. I would say that they're the two main rivals that compete in the space of competition for the marketplace of ideas about what makes an action right or wrong. So we're going to learn about these ethical theories. An ethical theory is a theoretical attempt to devise a system which will give us answers as to what makes an action right or wrong, moral or immoral, just or unjust. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to take you guys into as we start learning about one major moral theory today is just a little bit more primary information on ethics itself. I want to talk to you about what are the three main categories of moral action, okay? So there are three types of action basically in ethics. Sometimes people include a fourth, but these are the main three, okay? So three main types of action in ethics. Okay, so some actions are deemed morally impermissible. Okay, on the flip side of that, to the contrary, there are actions that are classified or thought to be morally permissible. And then finally, a further category of moral action are those regarded as morally obligatory. Okay, morally impermissible, permissible, or perhaps obligatory. So just like working off of common sense and your everyday understanding of, language, let's see if you could guess or make a correct judgment about what maybe these terms refer to or mean. So suppose that an action is labeled morally impermissible. What do you think that means in other words? Saying that it's morally impermissible is just sort of a fancy way of saying that the action is basically what? What do you think? If you had to guess. Taking a wild guess, morally impermissible. What could that be? So what do you think? Where's your intuition about this definition or whatever of this term? That the action is wrong. Very good. Yes, it's wrong. It's not acceptable. So it's not permitted or allowed by like the rules of morality. So this is an action that is a wrong action. It's a thing that's wrong to do. So I'll put that here. These are actions that are wrong. And actions that are morally wrong. And to be a little bit less formal about it, we might just say or describe the actions as these are things that they're not okay to do. So not okay to do them. Now, do people ever do those things? Yes. Doesn't mean that they're not possible to do. It just means that they're not okay in the moral sense. Like whether a person actually commits such an act or not, they shouldn't have done it. Morally speaking, it was bad that they did it. It was wrong that they did it. So, cool. I guess there's two ways I could do this. We could go in. I want to talk about examples of each category, but maybe let's list the definitions first. Okay, so that's morally impermissible. On the flip side, we have morally permissible. So now, basing off of what this means, maybe it's easier to even guess what is morally permissible kind of action then. So instead of it being impermissible, we're saying now this is a morally permissible action. What do you think that means by definition? If it's morally permissible, then it's like the reverse of the impermissible acts. So this would be actions that are what? Second category here, just thinking about it. What do you say to the question, what does it mean if it's morally permissible? Actions that are right, that's what you're saying, Grant. Okay, good. I like that. That's a good intuition. Or you're saying, Ryan, actions that are allowed. Drew, good or okay to do. Dimitri, A-okay. I like the use of the heavy reliance on the term okay. Yes. Let me kind of bring all these comments together, and they're mostly all on the right page. These are actions that I would say, so to one comment here, Grant, you said actions that are right. And that's, of course, natural to say because right, as we just saw, is like the logical corollary of wrong, And if these are wrong, you're thinking, well, on the other side of the scale, these are right. True enough. Many of the morally permissible actions would be claimed to be a right thing to do. But I want to state it a little more minimally just because many of the morally permissible actions don't necessarily create any kind of positive benefits for anybody. They're just things that you're not wrong for doing. So don't just think in your mind they have to be like noble acts of self-sacrifice and valor. It includes those, but it also includes a lot of more minimal things. Like if I'm wearing a red V-neck sweater, that's morally permissible, although no one could claim that this is a heroic action or anything, or it's helping anyone out. It's just that it's not immoral. No one can look at me wearing this and say, that's evil. What are you doing? Take off the sweater that you're wearing. So morally permissible actions, bring it back to the full circle. These are actions that are not wrong, okay? And yes, they are okay to do. So very good. Acts that are not wrong. And in other words, okay to do. Now to the third, this is morally obligatory. So morally obligatory, this is a concept that goes even a little further than what's permitted or permissible. So using the terminology and your current vocabulary, maybe you have a sense of this. What could it mean, or do you think it does mean, to say an action is morally obligatory, though? Morally obligatory. What is this one, if you have any thoughts? The wording is a big hint. Okay, Ryan, yeah, you say required. And Drew, you say that you should do. Yeah, it's even, I think, Ryan, you have the right kind of way of looking at it. Something that's morally mandatory instead of optional. So these are actions that you must do, and it would be wrong not to do them. So these are allowed, but these are like mandated. So these are permissible but not required, but these are required. So yes, correct. These are actions that you must do, and it would be wrong not to do them. So wrong not to do. So morally permissible, you may do these. Morally obligatory, you must do. Every morally obligatory action is permissible because you cannot be obligated to do something that's wrong. But not every permissible act is an obligation. Like, for example, me wearing this sweater is permitted, but it's not I'm not required to wear it. Okay, so let's just now go through the categories one time and help me if you can with some very straightforward common sense examples. Like, for example, morally impermissible. Now that we're clear on the definition, what do you think would be some particular actions that would fit that description and fit into the category? These are things that are morally impermissible, because definitely I'm sure that you have some ideas about what those concepts refer to. Obviously not everything that people do is okay or right. So what could be some things that are morally impermissible? Okay, so Dimitri is just going straight for the top, killing somebody. Yeah, well, that's one of the highest, I would say, level of moral misdeed. So that's high on the scale of what's impermissible. Killing a person without cause, you know, like serial killers and murderers do. That's, I mean, to take another human life against the person's will without cause, this has got to be one of the worst things that you can do. But there's other things, true. Alex, you give another case. Stealing, yeah, theft. Taking property that you didn't own, that you haven't purchased, that you're not authorized to have. Clearly, you have no right to obtain it since it comes from someone's labor and income. So that would be another good case, theft. Theft is wrong. It's not morally okay or permitted. Theft, murder, and you know the list goes on, guys. I'm sure you have more than just two concepts of wrong things, things that are wrong. Well, greed is not so much an action. It's an attitude, Connor. So in morality, these are types of action in ethics. Now, greed could inspire someone to do a morally impermissible act, like commit theft or fraud or whatever the case may be. But greed in and of itself, if it doesn't manifest into an action, I guess you can't say is wrong. Criminal acts in general, Drew, well, and Grant, you say public urination. Well, okay, let me go into those examples mentioned here. It's important, actually, and I was hoping that this would come up because it has to be mentioned in this lecture, that we cannot actually completely equate the legal with the moral, nor can we absolutely identify the illegal with the immoral. And that is because that would eliminate the ability to criticize laws as themselves unjust, okay? And of course, there's definitely room for civil disobedience and righteous advocacy for overturning certain laws. So like, for example, can anybody here think of an action that has ever been legally permitted, but a reasonable moral person would say that's still wrong, even if it was allowed under the law? An institution or practice legal, at least at some time, but even when it was legal, it was wrong for people to be doing that. Can you think of any such thing? Okay, Grant, you say owning slaves. Yes, that's a good case. Slavery would be a typical example of an institution that was protected under the law, but it was an unjust institution in and of itself. So if we just say that breaking the law is always wrong, we would miss that, right? Say that people who freed the slaves, like Harriet Tubman and stuff, under the laws that then existed, these people were committing crimes, but we don't think they were doing anything wrong. Or, yeah, you mentioned discrimination, Jim Crow, segregation laws that existed in our country. And it's not just America either, of course. Like, look at Nazi Germany. You would have, during the Holocaust, perhaps been committing a crime if you'd given safe harbor to a Jewish person like Anne Frank was hiding in the Anne Frank house. But of course, people that took those actions, we don't regard them as evil, deviant, immoral people, but rather people who resisted the existing laws, which themselves were unjust. Now, I don't want you to take it in the opposite extreme and just think laws have no moral force and they're just there, but they're not necessarily good. For the most part, I would argue, and probably you agree, that the laws do reflect our shared sense of morality, but human beings are not infallible gods, and therefore we have and we can sometimes institute laws that deviate from at least some possible moral perspective. I mean, there are lots of pro-life people, for example, even today, that find the status quo under the Supreme Court ruling of Roe and Wade to be an unjust ruling, but that's the law anyway. So, you can legally obtain an abortion in all 50 states, but of course some people think that this is a violation of their moral principles. So anyway, I don't want to just too easily equate the law with morality, because again, sometimes there are legally protected acts that are immoral, and sometimes the law forbids acts that are moral in and of themselves. I mean, some people think that using recreational drugs of certain kinds is not immoral, but of course they're federally prohibited at least. So making moral judgment is not necessarily the same thing as just looking at the laws and saying, well, the law tells me what's right and wrong. It tells you what you're allowed or not allowed to do for fear of penalty, but it doesn't necessarily answer all the moral questions. So I'm glad we had this little sidebar. I want you to think about yourself when you think of ethics as the legislator who institutes the laws yourself by voting on them. If you're in, let's say, the Senate and a bill comes before you and it says, shall we legalize certain drugs or drug X or not? Not actually X, okay, so like drug variable Z or not. And if you're the one that's actually voting on that, you can't just defer the moral judgment to a higher court of authority, right? You're the person who decides, should this be legal or not? So think about moral principles as the original judge of whether they're right or wrong, rather than the subject to the laws based on judgments that have come from other people, okay? Because we're all free to have our own moral compass, but of course you can't violate the law without penalty. Okay, so morally impermissible. You guys gave some good examples, right? Let's just kind of come back to full circle. You talked about murder, stealing, and we could have gone on further. Rape, torture, genocide, and even littler things too. So sometimes there are things that are immoral that are not ruled out by the law, like just personal lies or violation of promises. So say that I told someone, hey, you need a ride from the airport because you don't have a ride and you don't want to call it Uber. So I promise you, I'll pick you up on Saturday at noon, which is when your plane touches down. And then they're there, they're waiting for me, they call me, they say, hey, what's up? You're 30 minutes late, are you getting traffic or what? And I say, no traffic. The thing is, I was playing with you the whole time. When I said I was going to pick you up and I promised, I was just hoping to strand you at the airport. So now you're there. Good luck getting home. I don't know what you're going to do. Ha ha ha. You hang up on the person. Now, that's wrong because that's violating your promise and it's just a mean-spirited thing to do, but it's also not a crime, right? The person on the other end can't say, well, I hope you like the police because I'm going to file a report on you because you lied to me about coming to get me to the airport. So you can have misdeeds that are morally wrong, but they don't rise to the level of a crime. On the other hand, you can sometimes have actions that are considered a crime, but not in themselves judged to be immoral by some people. So anyway, we have a full range of possible actions that fit into this category, bad stuff, like we've said. Now, morally permissible, second category. Maybe any of you has a few thoughts about what could be in that realm. Morally permissible acts. I would say this, it's probably really easy. I'm hoping for you to come up with examples because you're all good people, right? So like everything you do is pretty much right there with very few exceptions. So you can just look at your own experience and take some examples. What could be things that are not wrong to do? Maybe some of you are even doing some of these things right now, but let me know. Or charitable acts. Okay, that's good, Dimitri. A charitable act like giving money or time to a worthy cause, donating food or clothing, for the needy, for example. No one's going to say that what you're doing is terrible and that's wrong. Of course, that's very noble and, in a way, an act of sacrifice to benefit others. But you're also correct, Drew, that it includes more minimal things like eating lunch. Unless, of course, you're eating something like a human being or something weird. But yeah, for the most part, eating lunch, no one's going to condemn on a moral basis. So eating lunch, just sitting, sure. Can't think, I'm a philosopher, right? So I'm trained to think of exceptions to every example, but I can't think of much in terms of sitting. So that seems fair enough. Getting an education, right? Yeah, going to school, what you're doing now, it's a good thing and it's not wrong at all. Driving the speed limit, sure. unless maybe you've got a choking toddler in the back seat and they need to be rushed to the hospital, regardless of the laws. But yes, in the ordinary course of events, no problem driving the speed limit. Okay, yeah, so getting up, going for a walk, helping someone across the street, donating to charity, getting through school, whatever. These are all things that are blameless on a moral scale. So no one's going to say, and nor should they say, that this is wrong on you and something bad. Now, morally obligatory, these, on the other hand, are actions that you must do, and it would be wrong not to do them. So sometimes it's hard for people to think of examples of these, but I'll give you just a few. Eating meat, Ryan, are you talking about a morally permissible act? I think, yeah, you're still on the previous discussion. Well, you know, it's a vexing issue, actually. Some people, like I just recently was a judge for the ethics bowl at Chapman University. Some of us professors were official judges in the National High School Ethics Bowl, and that was one of the cases that the students dealt with, factory farming. So whether you think so or not, definitely there are people in the world who think that there are moral questions about the permissibility of subjecting animals to the factory farm conditions. Now, me personally, I would tend to agree with you because I don't think that animals have the moral status that humans do. So using them for our purposes, exploiting them in some ways, I don't find it absolutely immoral, but I'm a little bit concerned with the level of suffering that they undergo just as a compassionate person. So if the practices that they're being put through could be somehow made a little more humane, I wouldn't have any problem with that. But you don't raise an issue, Ryan, here that's completely without any complexity. There are definitely people with powerful arguments, and sometimes I have to teach that material in a contemporary ethics class. We deal with the pro-meat and the anti-meat arguments. But anyway, it's good to have these debates and these controversies in a way to think through our own positions. Anyway, though, for the morally obligatory category, you could think of the non-performance of all the impermissible acts. So that's an easy equation. If it's impermissible, you're obligated not to do it. So like killing people is impermissible. Therefore, you have a moral obligation not to kill. Stealing is impermissible, so you have a moral obligation not to do that. Also, vice versa. Anything that's a moral obligation, not doing it is impermissible. So say that you ordered food at a restaurant. I know there's not a lot of dining right now, but suppose it's one of those outdoor patio or whatever places. You order the food. They've served you, and then do you have a moral obligation to pay at the end? Well, yes, right, because it's a service rendered to you at some cost. So you can't just say, I'm at liberty to just get up and walk away without paying the bill. So, you know, morally obligatory would be, let's say, paying for a service that's been rendered to you, and therefore it would be morally impermissible not to do that. Another case of moral obligation would just be simply keeping promises. Whenever you make a promise, you establish a moral obligation to follow through on the act. Because if you don't want to have that obligation, then you just should not promise to do it, you know. So like the case mentioned earlier, if I promise my friend to give them a ride from the airport, then in that case, I no longer am at liberty to say, well, I just don't feel like doing it. Then I would break a promise, which isn't breaking the law, but it is violating a moral duty that I gave by making the vow. Promising in a wedding, right? I vow to love, honor, and obey till death do us part. You know, that's supposed to make it a moral obligation for you not to cheat on your husband or wife. So all these are good examples, and I just kind of wanted to start by a basic description of what the landscape of moral actions are. So here's the next step. So with ethical theories, we read these authors who try to give us their insight and their analysis as to what it is that makes an action fit into these different categories. So every action that you ever do is a member of one of these. It's either something that it's okay for you to do, or that you really have to do, or that you shouldn't be doing at all. So now we're looking at what principles will allow us to group actions into these various categories. And that's when we learn about some moral theory. So let's take a quick look then at the first major moral theory we'll study. And this is what we call utilitarianism. So the moral theory of utilitarianism. There have been a few different authors that have been followers and those that promote utilitarian theory or utilitarian ethics. The main forefather of the whole field that I kind of think should get most credit is this man, John Stuart Mill. Let me make sure I'm spelling his name properly, because I always forget whether it's spelled with a U or with the W. Yeah, it's the U spelling. So John Stuart Mill Okay, John Stuart Mill, he's our author for today, and also on Wednesday we'll have 2 meetings on his material. He's a British philosopher and economist who lived in the 19th century from 1806 until 1873. And yeah, so I told you he was a philosopher and a political economist. He also briefly served in the British Parliament during his life. So he was also a politician and a member of the, like that's the equivalent in Britain of our United States Senate. So he was a legislator. And he had an interesting mix of different views, just personally, what he thought about things in life. He would have been what we consider today a big-time libertarian, meaning that he thought that the government should have the least amount of power, which is consistent with maintaining social order, but no more than that. So he would have been a person that thought limited government, don't interfere in the individual liberty of the states, well, not the states in Britain, but of the individual citizens, as long as what they are doing does not affect other people and their material well-being. So if there are self-regarding actions that some people think of as a vice, but they don't actually create any victims, like alcohol consumption, drug use, prostitution, gambling, these so-called victimless crimes or whatever, he would have said we have to give people the freedom to make those choices on their own. The only things he thought should be criminally prohibited were things that actually harmed others. So he would be a libertarian in that sense. But at the same time, he was also a champion of a lot of progressive causes in his lifetime, especially given the time period that he lived in. So he was an advocate for the worldwide abolition of slavery, for women to have the right to vote. So, you know, he had an interesting mix of views. But what he's most famously known for are his writings on ethics concerning utilitarianism. So that's what we're going to learn about now. All right, so utilitarian ethics, the main principle that this ethical theory states is that you should always take the action which leads to the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So I'm going to write that statement here because that's really like the core of this whole theory. So act always to promote the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. Okay, act always to promote the greatest amount of overall happiness for the greatest number of people. So it's all about the maximization of total happiness for as many people as possible. Therefore, if you're a utilitarian and you were going to try and live by this standard, if this was your moral compass, then whenever you had a choice to make and you had options facing you, you would try your best to select the option out of those choices that would lead to the greatest total amount of happiness for all affected. And whichever action that is would be the morally obligatory action. The ones aside from it that derive less total happiness for the maximum number of people would be, by comparison, impermissible. Okay, so another little note here. Utilitarian theory is a member of a family of theories that are called consequentialist. Okay, so it's one member of the big broad category consequentialism. And let me just say a word about what that term means also. Consequentialism. Okay, so like for example, my name is Richard Vulich, so my family name is Vulich. I'm a member of the Vulich family. Utilitarianism is a member of the consequentialism family. So you can think of it as like, it has siblings that are also consequentialists, but they're a little different from it. Anyway, consequentialism overall is the idea that the morality of an act depends on the consequences that come from it. So what I wrote there is consequentialism definition. The morality of an act depends on its consequences. So suppose this little stick figure represents a person like you or me, and they do an action, and after the action, some consequences happen. So that's this little diagram. The arrow is an arrow of time. say they do an action, some amount of time passes, and the consequences of the action come to light. That's this letter C that I've kind of circled with little dashes. Every act has some consequences. Maybe sometimes they're not very eventful, and other times maybe they have a bigger impact. But with consequentialist ethical theories, you're supposed to gauge the morality of the action by looking at the nature of its consequences. So if the consequences are good, if the results that come from doing it are good, then it's good action. If the results that come from it are bad in some sense to be described, then that's a bad action. Now, utilitarianism is a member of the consequentialist clan because it says the consequences are the moral factor that matters, but which consequences? Those that bear on overall human happiness. So the goal for the utilitarian is try to game out how much total happiness would be generated by each of your available options. And then whichever one would generate the most as a consequence, that's the action that you're obligated to take. Okay? I'm going to continue adding notes because there's definitely a little more to say on this, but I'm just kind of bringing you into it slowly. My method is to try and start with the most general description and then tunnel into the details. So what you know for now is that utilitarianism says what you should be doing morally is taking the action that leads to the greatest overall happiness for the greatest number of people. And this is a member of the consequentialist school of thought, which says that the consequences, the result, the things that happen afterwards as a basis of what you did are the things that determine the morality of the action, whether it's good or bad. Okay, now as further reinforcement for the theory, John Stuart Mill adds this principle, which he calls the greatest happiness principle. Okay, so this is just like a pillar of support, like a leg that's standing underneath the theory to give it greater, I guess, persuasiveness to the reader. The greatest happiness principle just says this. It says actions are right, morally right, insofar or to the extent that they promote happiness or pleasure, and they are morally wrong to the extent that they promote the reverse of happiness. So actions are right to the extent that they promote happiness, and actions are wrong to the extent that they promote the reverse of happiness. Okay, so hopefully you can see what it says there is the greatest happiness principle. And this is what it says. It says actions are right to the extent that they promote happiness, and actions are wrong to the extent that they promote the reverse. Now, even a further piece of detail here about the way the term happiness is being understood in these utilitarian writings and theories. As we've probably used the word happiness, it has a kind of vague meaning. It's just something good, you're feeling good, but it has a little bit of a more precise meaning in this theory, which is pleasure and the absence of pain. So just create a little extra room here. This is the greatest happiness principle, GHP. Okay, up here, so what's this definition of happiness anyway? Here's what the author gives us. Happiness equals pleasure and the absence of pain. Okay, so if that is what happiness is, I bet you one of you guys here can reel off what is the reverse of happiness. Just looking at this definition, if happiness is pleasure and the absence of pain, I guess looking at this definition, if that's what happiness is, then what would be reverse of happiness? It'd be what and what. So if you can follow this format. Happiness, pleasure, and the absence of pain. What's the contrary of that? It's blank and blank. That's a hint. What do you think would be the statement that I'm hinting at here as I'm asking about the reverse of happiness definition? So it's not pleasure in the absence of pain, but it's something in the absence of something else. What is that? the reverse. Okay, very good. Yes, Grant. It's pain in the absence of pleasure. Yeah, very good. And similar, Patrick. So essentially, in other words, happiness is being identified with pleasure and not suffering and pain. And the opposite of that is suffering and pain and having pleasure taken away. So now that we have a sense of what these terms mean, coming back to the greatest happiness principle, here is really what it's saying. To the extent that you promote pleasure and take pain away, not just for yourself, but for as many people around you as possible, that improves your moral record. That's a better and better action. So the more pleasure and happiness that you create, the better the action is. And the more pain that a person takes away, the better the action is. So if you think about people who, I don't know, we might regard as good moral examples to follow, these, according to utilitarianism, are the kind of people who make others happy or create pleasure for them in whatever way. Like, say, a doctor, right? That's a surgeon, that's a skilled surgeon, is correcting all kinds of terrible illnesses and diseases, etc., making people's lives better and more pain-free and capable going forward. So all the pleasure that was added to their life, or all the pain that was taken away, even in just one case, that's a good thing. Now, if they work on 10, 20, 100 people, 1,000 in their career, you'd say that they did a lot of really good things. Or another example, someone is active in some kind of aid organization, collecting money to funnel to a needy cause, a worthy cause. The more lives they save, the more conditions they improve for people. We think that is a good thing. And the words "to the extent" means the more the better. So it's kind of like a matter of degree. On the other hand, who do we think of as bad people? Well, those that are going around doing the opposite, causing pain for people or taking their existing happiness away. So like if somebody, I don't know, kills people, then they delete from the world all the happiness that they otherwise would have experienced throughout the whole remainder of their life. So that's taking all the happiness that would have existed and eliminating it from the world. And in some cases, imposing pain on people. And we're not just talking about like literal physical pain, but it could be psychological pain or fear, anxiety, trauma of whatever other kind. So like if a person kills even one human being, that is a terrible, terrible act, and that's fundamentally wrong. But if they kill 5, 10, 100, you know, this is compounding the moral wrongness of their track record in life. So that's all the greatest happiness principle is saying, that if you want to do the right thing, it's going to be better and better the more pleasure you create or the more pain you take away. And if you're going to do something wrong, then it's going to go further and further along the moral scale, the more pain you cause and the more pleasure you take away. I mean, and you can imagine the highest possible heights of immorality. Think of people like, I don't know, Hitler and stuff, you know, executing and killing millions of people on a kind of genocidal basis. That's very, very high on the moral scale of how bad a person could possibly act. So, you know, there's levels to this basically. And this is all that that's saying. The greatest happiness principle is supposed to have some kind of immediate purchase on our common sense, because each one of us seeks pleasure for ourselves and seeks to avoid pain. Patrick, killing 1 to save 5 could be justified. Well, you're already, I think, ahead of the game a little bit, because there are going to be some weird scenarios to consider that are going to pose problems for this theory, certainly. So my first job is to just kind of persuade you of the coherence of the theory and to get you to understand its best foot forward, basically. But then, as always in philosophy, we're going to try and tear it down, poke holes in it, find a bunch of room for objection. And that's going to be one of the possible objections, for sure, Patrick. So we'll keep that thought. And when we return back to the objections, we're going to speak on that issue. Because, like, yes, suppose that, just a random example, okay? Like, suppose that someone killed a homeless person and used their organs to save, like, 5 others. Well, suppose this person doesn't have any existing family or friends, and although the loss of their life is a tragedy, the 5 lives saved by means of their organs creates more total happiness than would have been the case if we had spared their life and allowed the 5 patients that are sick to die. But that seems to most people fundamentally wrong. You know, take one person's life so that you can save a greater number. Nonetheless, with utilitarian theory and principles just as they are, it becomes complicated task for adherents to the theory, followers of the theory, to explain why that is wrong. And yes, the trolley problem, Drew. We are going to talk about the trolley problem itself next week, I believe. So we'll come back to that also. Very interesting and almost, I mean, if you have a darker sense of humor, funny, some of these trolley problem scenarios that can be studied or looked at. There's a whole set of memes, trolley problem memes, if any of you guys like that kind of humor. There's a really hilarious Facebook group. It's kind of somewhat philosophical humor, and some of it's a little nihilistic, but it actually does help you understand some of the basic features of that essay. And it's a classic puzzle case in ethics. We'll get to the trolley problem. Okay, so now we know the utilitarian theory, a major principle that's supposed to back that theory, and some further commentary on what some of the terms in here mean. Now what I want to do is kind of, let's see, we have about 5 minutes, so this is something that we're going to roll over into the next meeting as well. But the thing I wanted to move on to next was to kind of show you guys an example of how the theory could be applied in an actual concrete situation. This requires me to set up a little graph here and survey some members of the class for their preferences when it comes to a particular choice. So I don't know how far we will get, but let's try and run through to the end of the class meeting time, and then we'll just start off with wherever we left off. So here's a box. And in the box, I'm just going to create 4 vertical columns and 4 horizontal rows, which therefore creates this 16-box grid. In the top 4 vertical columns, let me just ask anybody here about some popular and well-known pizza topping options. So this is a pizza topping scenario of choice. What's one well-known topping selection that is a style of pizza that many people know or would order? This one I hope is not too bad. I know you guys have had pizza before. Okay, pepperoni. Let's say P for pepperoni. So that's the pepperoni column. We got that. Now moving to the next one, cheese. All right, cheese. Letter C for cheese. I still need 2 more. Not pepperoni, not cheese. Another option. Let's see. Pepperoni and cheese. I figured those would be the first 2 to come out. Ham and pineapple and sausage. Okay. Well, pineapple also starts with a P, but since 2 people have asked for it, let me put P-I, pineapple. P by itself, pepperoni. And then over here, one more. I see bacon, sausage, different possibilities. Maybe let's go sausage. I don't know, because I saw it first. Okay, so pepperoni, cheese, pineapple, sausage. Now, this part, I'm going to add 4 names over here to the left. But these have to be 4 members of the class that will definitely come back on Wednesday. So people that are not going to be present, don't volunteer. But it's not a big thing. It's not like you're going to have to do anything. You just have to answer a couple questions in the group chat here, or in the live chat, whatever, about how much you like these different toppings compared to each other. So who's willing to add their name to this? Let me see anybody. Just kind of have to answer some pizza questions, but not too big a deal. So I need 4 different individuals of the class. Okay, cool, Grant, that's you. Grant. And next up, Ryan, Nicole. Okay, I see Nicole. Ryan and Ellie. Okay, let's do that. Grant, Nicole, Ryan, Ellie. Now, like we know, there is only about 1.5 minutes, but here's what I want you to think about for the moment. See these 4 types of pizza? Imagine that you had to give a score 0 through 50. You know how people are like 10 for 10, I would love this pizza or whatever. Well, let's go through 0 to 50. I just want to create a slightly larger range for you to play with the numbers. And now this number, if you give me a number between 0 and 50 and say I ask you pepperoni, what's the number? This is like the pleasure score basically for you. So if 0 to 50 is like representing quantity of pleasure for you, and this is your favorite topping out of those, that should be shown by the number that you assign. So if you like pepperoni twice as much as cheese, I don't know, 40 and 20 or 50 and 25, whatever. You know, you're the one that's, I don't know what your preferences are, only you do, but we're going to find out, right? So look at these 4 toppings here and start thinking right now about how you would give numeric scores, which are supposed to represent a pleasure value, okay? 0 meaning like no pleasure. It's like just, it's not pleasing for you to have that. 50, I guess, your favorite, and anything in the middle or in between, you know, that's all the shades of gray, okay? So everyone's a little different. You know, what I like is pizza. Maybe you find it gross and vice versa, and that's okay. But now we're going to just game out the scenario. So look, hold that thought. You four guys here, I have, of course, the videos are all recorded and archived. So when I start on Wednesday, I'm going to just draw the graph again with the blank spaces here. And the 4 members that have volunteered, provided that you're still here. If you're not, it'll be okay. I mean, I'll replace you with someone else. But provided that you're still here, you'll be able to give me your 4 scores, and then we'll continue through the presentation from there. So, all right, everyone. That's good for now. I'm glad we got through the meeting. Like I told you last week, and I felt kind of badly because we cut out twice. After the first time we cut out, I said, this is almost unprecedented, never happens in hundreds of lectures, which is true. And then just by, whatever, the grace of God or whoever, it happened twice on Friday. So it's not going to happen again. I'm glad we got through a good meeting without that problem. So anyways, guys, have a good day and enjoy the rest of your meetings today for your other classes. I'll see you back on Wednesday. And if you need anything, always let me know by email, and I'll check my messages. Okay, guys, so signing off. Thanks again, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye.